Thank you, Dee. Like I said, my name is Glenn Nyman. For those maybe missed my last presentation, I went through Rcia also. Coming up this Easter will be 30 years for me. I did it back in a little bitty small church in Oregon, Illinois, and there was 6 of us. And so this is much different than what I went through. But I appreciate you guys being here, and I know it's a huge commitment for you guys, and I hope that I can convey some things tonight that God wants you to hear and that it's meaningful for you. So we're starting on the 10 Commandments tonight. So the next 4 sessions you'll be going through all 10 of them, and I'm presenting them as the Catholic Church presents them in the Catechism. So if you're coming from a Protestant background of faith or something like that, you may notice that maybe the numbering is off a little bit. Sometimes, depending on the certain faith, they split number 1 out into 2. So it's just, it may look a little different than you're used to. But these are, like I said, according to what the Catholic Church teaches. And so we're gonna jump right in it. We're gonna do 1, 2, and 3 tonight, and we're gonna spend most of our time on number 1. And you're probably wondering what the heck 4 animals up here have to do with the 10 Commandments. Well, in years past, I've given a personality inventory for you. If anyone has ever done this in the past, and I just thought, what's relevant is the differences in people's personalities and not so much just sitting here and doing the thing for 15 or 20 minutes. So I just wanted to go through that because I think it's important, because the 10 Commandments are built on relationships. They're all based on relationships, on how we relate. The first 3 commandments are our relationship to God. The next 7 are our relationship to our fellow man, to our neighbor. So it is all tied into relationships, and because there's 4 distinct personality types, our way of seeing and viewing things and interacting with people and with God is different. So what we've got, the 4 main ones, you got a lion. They're I don't know what you want to, there's many different types of personality inventories, but the lion likes to lead, is good at making decisions, very goal-oriented, enjoys challenges, difficult assignments, opportunity for advancement. Because lions think of the goal, they can step on people, they can be a little overly aggressive and bossy, competitive, and so these are the very strong personality types. The next one is an otter. They're very social. They enjoy being popular, influencing, motivating others. They can sometimes get hurt when people don't like them or appreciate them. Otter personalities usually have lots of friends, but not many deep relationships. So this is more social creatures. Then you've got a golden retriever, which is the peacemakers of the world, good at making friends. They're very loyal. They don't like big changes. They look for security, can be very, very sensitive and caring. And then the last is the beavers, which are the very analytical type. Organized beavers, like myself, I'm a beaver, think there's a right way to do it, and that's the way you're going to do it. And that can lead to some difficulties at times, and it has in my life, because up until I did this personality inventory about 8 years ago, I thought everybody thought like I did. So when you're dealing with relationships, especially if you're dealing with someone who's a lion or a golden retriever, they're not thinking on the same thought processes as you are. So you're expecting a certain outcome, and they are totally on a different page. So that's why I thought it important that we talk about these, or just bring them up, so that we know that there are differences in how we assimilate and process information and how we interact with people. So in relation to the 10 Commandments, we're all going to fit into that, and it's all going to have a bearing on how we relate to God. So now you might wonder again, what's the baseball field doing in the 10 Commandments? But America's pastime, everyone knows what baseball is. But there are certain rules in baseball that make baseball baseball. You got the foul poles, you got 3 bases, you can only have 3 strikes or you're out. And without those rules, baseball becomes a very chaotic game. Just like at the end of the 16 World Series when the Cubs won. But that's what baseball can look like with that, is you end up with chaos. And the 10 Commandments are kind of like our game rules for life. If you put the first commandment on the third base foul line, 10th commandment on the other one, you've got that whole big friendly confines that you can have a lot of fun and a lot of enjoyment in your life. And that, it just works for my brain if I kind of visualize it that way, is that, yeah, we are all part of this life, but we have certain rules that we need to follow. And the 10 Commandments are pretty much our basis for our moral law on how people are supposed to interact with each other. So, I mean, they are important aspects of the church teaching. So, we know the story of the 10 Commandments. We've all probably seen this movie. The old, I don't know when it was built, in the 60s it came out with this, but my version that I like is the Saturday Night Live version with John Hammond. And so there's all kinds of things that have been out there in culture that have been shown to us as far as the 10 Commandments. And so we'll just jump right into the first one here. So the first one, you shall love the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. So you look at that on the surface. To me, I look at that and okay, that's pretty straightforward. So with the way I think and process things, I tend to do that. I tend to go, okay, check, I've got that, without really looking at it more than what face value is. Because my brain always works. I've always tended to like things very analytical, things with definitive black and white answers. And when you start talking about loving God and him only can you serve, it's pretty vague. I mean, it's not a definitive answer there that I can understand. You know, that makes more sense to me. That does, or that does. Balancing equations, you know, oxidation of methane, 2 molecules of oxygen, and 1 molecule of CO2, and 2 molecules of water. You know, that was great in chemistry in high school and college, just because everything had the rules. You followed the rules. So, and the thing is, with the 10 Commandments, I guess, to me, it always started out with is, what is your vision of God? How do you perceive God? Is he somebody like that? Of a judging, punishing God who's up in heaven and he's looking down at us, and we've got to stay in line, we've got to do all the right things, otherwise God's going to come down and drop the hammer on us. Or maybe the otters and the golden retrievers, they might see this version of God. The loving, fatherly, comforting God. Reaching down from heaven, searching for man, always seeking him into a loving, personal, overflowing relationship. So, for most of my life, or better part of it, I thought my vision was the guy on the left. Was this person who was detached from me, not any kind of personal relationship, and just knowing that if you screwed up, that God's going to punish you somehow. So more of a fear-type relationship and everything else. I didn't have a lot of churching, per se, growing up. We did go to church. My dad was agnostic. My mom took us to church up until we hit high school, and at a Methodist church, and then pretty much we got dropped. So everything was introduced to us, but then beyond that point, it was kind of on our own. So without anybody there to kind of nudge me along, it's pretty much fell by the wayside to me. So that, for a long time, that was my vision. But which one is he? And I would say he's both, all wrapped up into one. You know, God does judge justly because he is holy, and he demands judgment and punishment for sins. But he's also a compassionate, mercy-giving, full of love. And so for me, that was always really difficult to try to understand that, to just wrap my head around how can he be both? And because I don't experience this guy on the right. Up until that point in my life, I had not. You know, even Einstein, an atheist, unlocked the biggest secrets of the universe in the 20th century. I mean, he understood, he didn't believe in God, but he understood that what he was doing, that there was some sort of organization And there was something behind it all that had designed it, because there was perfect design to it. So, but he couldn't explain it. He couldn't explain it in any way other than just he could figure out how to unlock certain secrets.
He's God. Somewhere in their fifth dimension, they saved us. What the hell is they? That's why they want to help us, huh? I don't know, but they constructed this three-dimensional space inside their five-dimensional reality to allow you to understand it. Well, that ain't working. Yes, it is.
So, for those of you who love science fiction like I do, that was a clip from Interstellar. Came out a few years ago, Matthew McConaughey, and that version, they're flying around in the solar system, and they sent out a probe. It got sucked into a black hole, and he got sucked into it too. So they didn't know what was going to happen to him. They thought they were going to die. Well, they end up in this place in space, and it's a three-dimensional structure inside a five-dimensional reality. Well, that's kind of what God made here on Earth. We're just bound by three dimensions, but God's not bound by space or time. He deals with five dimensions. So, in order to understand God, you know, there's certain things that our human minds just really can't comprehend. You know, it does sound like science fiction. So, unfortunately, when many of us can't comprehend this, can't understand that, or we see it and we decide that, okay, that's really not for me, we simply give up or substitute something else for God. And what those somethings are called idols. So an idol, basic definition, is when we worship the created instead of the creator. And that's a common thing that we all do. I do it. I'm sure we all worship things that are not God. So, if we look back in history of Israel, when the Ten Commandments were first given to Moses, and he came down the mountain and gave them to the people, he went back up for 40 days to pray and commune with God. Well, he comes back. In 40 days, Aaron and the people had melted down all their gold, made a golden calf, and they were worshiping that. I mean, they couldn't even hold out for 40 days what had just transpired and the instructions that God had given them. And later on in Jewish history, when they were captured and exiled and things, you know, we find stories in the Bible from some of the later prophets of them worshiping other pagan gods. This one happens to be a picture of Baal. And so it's no different these days in our modern society. There's so many things that are put in front of us that media, advertising, everything tells us that this is what you need to be happy. If you get this car, if you get this size house, or you buy this perfume, that this will make you happy. You don't need any of this other stuff. So, and I think there are so many things that we'll touch on, some of the idols that the standard ones that we all know about. But I think the biggest idol, in my opinion, is the thing that we worship the most over God is that reflection you see in the mirror, is ourselves. You know, when we think that our accomplishments in life, you know, the things that we do, the money we make, all these things, that these are accomplishments that we've done on our own. When we don't give God the credit for allowing us to use our talents to get these things, is that we go around God, thinking that we know best, that we can control our lives better if we go around Him rather than to Him for that. And in society, we're bombarded by that. I gave you a few examples of that. It's a constant bombardment. And to be a Catholic Christian in today's society, you're going to act a little bit differently. You know, what we're told is how we're supposed to live is not what society tells us these days. You know, God is disappearing from American culture rapidly. And so I just want to bring this up, is that, you know, be mindful of what we think we are doing and how we're getting it. So one of the things that, there we go, one of the biggest idols that we encounter is wealth, money. Money's mentioned over 800 times in the Bible, Old and New Testament. Now, something that's mentioned 800 times in the Bible, I think is it's pretty important in my mind that it's mentioned that many times because it become a problem of being abused, becoming the source of what you're living for instead of using it as a tool. So, and out of that, you get greed. So, instead of, how can I use this money that I've earned for stewardship for the betterment of God's kingdom? Plain and simple. Next thing else is fame. What's our motivation for living? Are we trying to get personal attention by what we do, by our jobs, by our volunteerism? Are we looking for that fame, that pat on the back, to continue to fuel our pride? Or do we allow our works and our actions and what God allows us to do to go about those things in a humble way, to understand that it's only through God that we're being allowed to do these things? And power. That's another thing. When you're in a position of power over other people, maybe you're a boss for somebody, your own children, your spouse, do we use that position as a source of power to oppress other people? Or do we allow ourselves in our capacity of that station to show mercy and compassion to other people? And then you've got the sins of the flesh. Lust compared to love is a misplaced confidence. Lust manipulates others for the purpose of meeting one's own needs, even at the other sacrifice of the other. Whereas love is a self-giving, and it's a cost of sacrifice to yourself to give that. And then you've got the other sins of the flesh, drugs, alcohol, pornography, you name it, anything that gives you pleasure. It's not that some of these things are bad, but it depends on how you're using them. If you're using them for pleasure and being selfish, then it's disordered. So I say, let's look at what Jesus came to redeem us, to offer us salvation, and what did he say are the most important commandments. And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. The second commandment is similar. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So, if we're going to love God with all our heart, what does that kind of look like? Your heart is your place of emotion, is where some of your passions, some of your, where your love flows from. But you also have to be careful because your heart may deceive you. You have to ask yourself, what motivates you to do the actions and for your actions and your desires? So like I said earlier, if we are wanting to get that promotion so you can be the boss and then you can lord over people that maybe you had a bad boss and he treated you crappy and you want to get back at people. That's not a positive use of your heart. I mean, it tells you pretty much your true nature is where your heart is. And if you volunteer at a certain place because you want the attention to yourself rather than being there and volunteering for whatever purpose that volunteerism is for. So that's why I mean by your heart may deceive you. And even Jesus called the Pharisees out. This is from Matthew 15. And he was talking, the Pharisees came, and I love that Jesus puts them in their place all the time. And he came to show a different way, and the Pharisees are saying, no, 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 no. Why are your disciples eating with unclean hands? They're going to defile themselves. And this picks up right then after that. The things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile. For from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, unchastity, theft, false witness, blasphemy. These are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile. So our thoughts and our words, you can tell a lot about a person and where their heart is depending on what they say and how they act and carry themselves. And I know I spent a lot of years in my life, same thing. Your intentions were different. Even though you thought in your mind you were doing good, but your intentions were selfish. So if we love God with all your soul, your soul is your spiritual fingerprint that God gives you. In Hebrew, it's nephesh, which means to breathe. And if you look back at the creation story in Genesis, God breathed his breath into man, and you have God's spirit in you. That soul came from God. In Greek, it's called a psyche, your will, your drive, your passion. So if you're going to love God with all your soul, you kind of have to try to align your will to God's will and not your own. And we look at that, we got the best example in the world is Jesus, right before he goes off to be condemned, goes in the Garden of Gethsemane and he prays that, take this cup from me, but not my will be done, but yours. So even him in his humanity struggled with that, didn't want it to happen, but he understood and obeyed that it wasn't his purpose that he came to fulfill. It was God's purpose. So, and to love God with all your mind. And I guess, that means you got to think about God. You got to turn your thoughts to him. It's easy to understand. It's easy to look up here and go, okay, yeah, just think about God. But, how do we do that? There's so many distractions in the world. If you've got little kids, you get them to school, you got work, you've got laundry, groceries, you name it. There are so many things that we are having to do with our lives. And sometimes we just find that it's just, we don't have time or we don't make time to think about God. So even worry. If we're worried about things, we're supposed to trust in God. That selfish thoughts. So the Apostle Paul gives us something from Philippians on what to think about. It says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. So he's saying, get your mind out of the gutter and think about the good things that God has for you. Well, that takes a certain amount of training to do that. So if we're going to look at whatever is true, well, God is true. God's truth is there, and it's the only thing that won't let you down. So if you want to meditate on whatever is true, just think about God's love. Whatever is noble. Appreciate God's worth and be mindful of what he's done because he's working all around you. And sometimes it's just a matter of observing and being present to notice those things. And whatever is right. Right things have to do with God's will. Right things have to do with God's plan, not our plan. And whatever is pure, the redemptive love of Jesus and his gift of forgiveness and mercy is about the most pure thing that you could ever ask for. Whatever is lovely, God's abundance. I find that I can commune more with God being out in nature than probably most times that I go to Mass. Even though it's a different experience, but I can experience God in nature, just the sunshine on my face, those things and it's training your mind to being aware of how God touches you, how he interacts with you in your life on a daily basis. Whatever's gracious, turn your thoughts from seeing others' faults and seeing and seeking God's character in others. It's easy to judge people at other people's faults. You know, remove the log from your own eye before you take the splinter out of your brother's. You know, so it's a kind of a reorganization of how you look at things in life and in the world. And if anything is praiseworthy, celebrate what God's doing in your life. But what if you don't like what God's doing in your life? You know, sometimes things happen in your life, you're put on a certain course, people come into your life, things happen to you that you might not like. You might not think, why is God doing this? And it doesn't align up with what your thoughts of how your life should be. And I've had two separate experiences in my life that at first didn't make a lot of sense to me, but if you keep working at it, you usually find your answers. I call them aha moments, you can call them epiphanies, you can call them, whatever you want. But the first one that happened to me was that Jesus revealed himself, his true presence in the Eucharist. And this happened back in November of 1997. I had just gone on a Christ Renews His Parish retreat, which they have here. And it's designed to reinvigorate you, introduce you maybe, which is my case, introduce you to Jesus and to how he really, truly is. And it's a great program. You hear a lot of stories and witnesses from people that, and their life experiences on that. And it was like a month after I'd walked through this, I had prayed on this receipt to have a personal relationship with Christ. And I went to Mass one day. We had a big church, very similar to this one, with the windows on the side. It was all these stained glass floor-to-ceiling windows, huge vaulted ceiling. And it was a crappy day. It was cold. It was gray. It was spitting rain. And I went to communion, came back down, knelt to pray after communion. And it felt like out of these windows was this blinding light. And I don't know if it was or not because my eyes are closed, but I was just filled with, I couldn't see anything. It was just this white light. And I had this weird feeling of somebody was right there next to me. This physical presence. And it stayed with me for about 20, 30 seconds and then slowly left. And I had a pretty good idea of what it was, but I was just like, whoa. It's hard to comprehend and it's hard to believe that. But pretty much every time, if I was in tune to Mass when I went and not distracted, not thinking about the kids, what are they doing, playing on the floor, I would have the same experience. And that has stuck with me all these years. Sometimes you go into dry spells like everybody does and you may not experience it, but pretty much any time now, even if I walk into church, I can feel that presence. So I didn't know what to do with it for a long time. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand it. And as you go through life, we moved here in 2001, got a job out here, moved here for a job out in Quincy, and 4.5 years later, I get let go. So, you got to start your life all over again. I started a contracting business, so at 42 years old, I'm starting over new. When you get busy, you're doing other things, kids are getting older and everything else, so I slowly drifted away from the church and quit going. And just, it didn't go. Didn't feel the need. Felt that these other things in my life took precedence over that. And then, over the course of a couple years, I just had this nagging feeling that something was missing. And I just knew that the answers to what I was lacking and the answers to what was going on were in church. So I told my wife, I says, I'm going to start going to church. You can come with me or not, but I'm going to go at 10:15. So first Sunday back, God uses people to his benefit. And there was a gentleman over there, he was the lead usher at 10:15 Mass. His name was Al Porstowski. He recently passed away about 3 years ago. He was short and usher that day, and he goes, Glenn, can you usher? I go, I think so. He goes, well, can you walk backwards with a basket? I go, sure. He goes, you're an usher. So at the end of that Mass, he came up to me again. He goes, can you come do this next week? We need an usher. I'm going, sure. Well, good, then I'll count on you. So that gave me the motivation to come and put my butt in the pew every Sunday. And as I sat there, being fed, I didn't know, what I was searching for. I didn't know. I was waiting for God to give me a sign, to give me some direction. But it was in taking in the Eucharist, I still felt that presence. So I knew I was in the right spot. So the other thing that happened in my life was my mother came down with Alzheimer's in 2009. And if you've never experienced that in a family or know anybody who has, it can really wreak havoc and disrupt the family. And so I'm here in Florida. The rest of my family's up in Illinois. I got 2 older brothers, and they're just going crazy, trying to understand, to manage this whole thing as to how this is going to look moving forward down the road. So, and I didn't understand why either, because my mom, she took care of herself. She ate right. She exercised her mind. She did crossword puzzles every day. I mean, she was one of the smartest as a tack and did everything that she was supposed to, and she's the one who ends up with Alzheimer's. So that in itself didn't make any sense to me either as to why this was happening. So as I was sitting there one of those Sundays, it happened to be that the reading for that day was from Isaiah chapter 55. And as for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And I guess that went right to the heart. So I just realized that, okay, God's in control of this. God has a purpose. If God is love, well, then his purpose has to be good. And it comes down to a certain amount that you just have to accept it. There are certain things that we just are not able to understand with our human reasoning. So I trusted God to know that what was going on with my life and my mother's life and my family's life, that there was a good purpose behind it. So now I would go 3 times a year, sometimes 4, to go visit them. And it was only a short time that she went through a really confusing time, didn't understand what was going on, but then it was probably within 6 or 8 months, that just disappeared. And what got replaced on my visits, what I saw, was just pure joy. She would pick up a book and bring it to me and say, look. I go, I know. And she'd come back to me 5 minutes later with the same book. And the look in her eyes and everything else was like she was looking at it for the first time. And she was enjoying it. And it was like, okay, that don't make any sense either. Where is this coming from? So I struggled with that. In the meantime, I got 2 kids in college. 2008 happens, the housing crisis happens. And, between 2010 and probably 2015 was probably some of the worst economy in this town and all over the state for construction. So that leads to don't have enough money, kids in college, my wife and I are fighting. We don't agree on how the money's supposed to be spent. In that time I've had 3 surgeries on my arms, I got nerve damage on my hands, I'm having difficulty actually physically performing the work that I'm supposed to be doing in my new job. And I started to snowball down a rabbit's hole of self-pity and self-doubt. And I became a really bitter, not a nice person to be around. I withdrew from my family, didn't interact all that much, started drinking, trying to start to get to a place that didn't suck as much as I thought it was. And what that did is it led me to have high blood pressure. And that spiraled up to the point where I ended up in the hospital in 2015. And you were there. You did my nuclear scan. And you were very comforting. Thank you for that time. But yeah, so when you go there and you're thinking that I can handle this, it's up to me, all this stuff is going on, but then you're forced into a situation that you're completely not in control of it. There's nothing you can do about it. I go up to scan, I sit there for 2.5 hours waiting for the radiology report to come back, and I was convinced that they were going to crack me open and replumb my heart. My dad had quadruple bypass surgery at 67, so I was like, it's going to happen. And I just didn't know what to do. You're beside yourself with worry, with angst, and everything else, and then I just realized that the only thing that I could do at that point in time was pray. So I closed my eyes and laid in the bed, and I just prayed, and I said, God, heal me, make sure I'm good, but not my will, but yours be done. And in that instant, I realized that if that's true, if that's what I really want, then I've got to trust him with my life, with whatever it looks like. No matter what it is, I've got to trust him with this life that he's given me here in this world, or I've got to trust him in the next. And it connected on that level in my brain in that very instance, and I was immediately filled with peace. Because I knew that if you trust God, then no matter what happens, it's going to be okay. It might not be what you want, what you think. I looked at my mom and just said, just trust, her trust. She knew that somebody was going to take care of her, that she was going to be taken care of, and just let it all go. And it was a very powerful experience for me to go through. And I didn't come home from the hospital the same person I was. Spent a lot of time, this was on a Friday evening, I came home, spent a lot of time that Saturday, Sunday, just reflecting. And, if we're going to talk about loving God with all your mind, up until that point I realized that I was probably just what you call an intellectual Christian. I believed in the creeds, I believed in everything that the church taught because they said this is what you're supposed to believe. But when your actions don't match what you say you believe, then something's wrong. Something's not syncing. And I picked up a book that Sunday that I'd read 2-3 times, and I just picked it up and read it again. And it's, I don't know if anybody's ever read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And probably one of the most influential writers, probably the most influential writer in my life that I have read, because he has a way of explaining God in a way that makes sense to me. He gets through all the theological things and the big words and stuff and puts it in working man's English to where it made sense to me. And this is from chapter 15, and this kind of explains, or it fits right in with loving God with your mind. Now, if you don't know Screw Tape Letters, this is a fictional book written from Uncle Screw Tape to his nephew Wormwood. And they are, what do you want to call it, demons. They work for the devil. And they work and try to influence humans in the world on trying to get them to behave, to sin, so they can go to hell instead of heaven. So the humans live in time, but our enemy, God, destines them to eternity. He therefore, I believe, wants them to attend chiefly to 2 things: to eternity itself and to that point of time which they call the present. For the present is the point at which time touches eternity. Of the present moment and of it only, Humans haven't experienced the same to the experience which our enemy has of reality as a whole. In it alone, freedom and actuality are offered them. He would therefore have them continually concerned either with eternity, which means being concerned with him, or with the present, either meditating on their eternal union with or separation from himself, or else obeying the present voice of conscience, bearing the present cross, receiving the present grace, giving thanks for the present pleasure. And when I read that, it explained everything that was going on with my mother, because she was living in the present moment. And none of this other stuff, these distractions of the world, what was going to happen, what we should have for dinner, who was going to do the laundry, none of that mattered to her anymore. She was just simply living in the moment, experiencing God as in the world as God wanted her to have at that point in time. But it goes on. Our business is to get them away from the eternal and from the present. With this in view, we sometimes tempt a human, say a widow or a scholar, to live in the past. But this is of limited value, for they have some real knowledge of the past, and it has a determinate nature, and to that extent resembles eternity. It is far better to make them live in the future. Biological necessity makes all their passions point in that direction already, so that though about the future inflames hope and fear, also it is unknown to them, so that in making them think about it, we make them think of unrealities. In a word, the future is, of all things, the thing least like eternity. It is the most completely temporal part of time, for the past is frozen and no longer flows, and the present is all lit up with eternal rays. Hence the encouragement we have given all those schemes of thought, such as creative evolution, scientific humanism, or communism, which fix men's attentions on the future, on the very core of temporality. Hence, nearly all vices are rooted in the future. Gratitude looks to the past, and love to the present. Fear, avarice, lust, and ambition look ahead. To be sure, the enemy wants men to think of the future too, just so much as is necessary for the now planning the acts of justice or charity, which will probably be their duty tomorrow. The duty of planning the morrow's work is today's duty. Though its material is borrowed from the future, the duty, like all duties, is in the present. This is now straw splitting. He does not want men to give the future their hearts, to place their treasure in it. We do. His ideal is a man who, having worked all day for the good of posterity, if that is what his vocation is, washes his mind of the whole subject, commits the issue to heaven, and returns at once to the patience or gratitude demanded by the moment that is passing over him. But we want a man hag-ridden by the future, haunted by visions of an imminent heaven or hell upon earth, ready to break the enemy's commands in the present, if by so doing we make him think he can attain the one or avert the other, dependent for his faith on the success or failure of schemes whose end he will not live to see. We want a whole race perpetually in pursuit of the rainbow's end, never honest, nor kind, nor happy now, but always using as mere fuel wherewith to heap the altar of the future every real gift which is offered them in the present. And when I read that, I realized what a fool I was for the time lost in me worrying about the future, always thinking that, well, when I start making more money, then I can be happy. Or if I would have stayed in Illinois and ran the family business, then I'd be happy. But it doesn't do any good to do those things. But that's where our minds take us. So that has helped me, and ever since I've read those and understood that, is I've tried to live my life thinking about the here and now. Sure, we need to plan for the future tomorrow. We need to be good stewards of our job with our money. Take care of our children, help our fellow man. These are all things that are our duty, but to not worry about those things. To trust that, okay, they'll be fine. Do what we can today in the present moment. Tomorrow's none of our business.
You've got to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
That's from The Matrix, if you don't know what movie that's from, but I love that movie because it's the ultimate battle of good and evil. And I'm not saying that Lawrence Fishburne was casting this role to be a Jesus here, but it's parallels. You can see this in our normal culture. In Hollywood actually did this, and they're almost quoting Jesus word for word. He says, all I'm offering is the truth. And then he says, follow me. But how many of us, every day we wake up and take that blue pill? That we believe whatever we choose to. And a lot of us don't take the red pill because we're scared of what is down that rabbit hole. But when you take that red pill, when you stay in Wonderland, God's design is almost like Wonderland. You're going to see things and experience things that don't look normal, that don't appear to be normal. We read about it in the Bible. Virgin birth, some man claiming to be God's son, people rising from the dead, deaf and blind being cured, lepers cleansed, And God will give you even more if you stay in that, if you go down the rabbit hole. And you'll see things that you never thought were possible in your life by trusting God. But it takes one thing, choice. We're called to make that choice. And loving God is a choice. You got to choose it every day. Every moment sometimes for me is that you have to choose that. You get an unruly person, if somebody cuts you off, what's your first thoughts? You SOB, or are you going to just go, okay. And that is something that takes some discipline and some training and a lot of experimenting and a lot of failure. But it's worth it. And the best book that C.S. Lewis, I think, ever wrote was called The Great Divorce. It's a story, fantasy story, it's fiction, but it's kind of his tale of what it takes to get to heaven and stay there. And it doesn't, it kind of probably touches on some of the major sins, don't murder somebody, but that's not the ones that he exposes in there. It's the little ones. It's the gossiping. It's the resentment that you hold on to. It's all these little bitty sins that they all have to go if we're gonna make it to heaven too. And in this, one of the characters says there are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will be done." All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. And that's powerful in itself. Because you can think about it, we're the ones who choose it. We're the ones who choose, no, God, I know better, and I'm going to do it my way. And this quote from George MacDonald, there is no escape. There is no heaven with a little hell in it. No plan to retain this or that of the devil in our hearts or our pockets. Out Satan must go, every hair and every feather. And that's still relating to that thing. We can't think, okay, I'm going to do all this, I'm going to give all this up, but I'm going to hold on to this one thing. My brother, we don't get along, and I'm just going to hold on to that. Even those have to go. So if C.S. Lewis is someone that you can relate to, I would encourage you to read it. It's been powerful and moving for me. It might not, I gave it to my son-in-law, and he goes, I don't get it. So read it again. Come back to it in a few years. And then the last thing I'm going to end this then on the first commandment is the second two verses from Isaiah. The one where he talks about my ways are higher than the other. These are the next two. Just as from the heavens the rain and the snow come down and do not return there till they have watered the earth, making it fertile and fruitful, giving seed to the one who sows and bread to the one who eats, so shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but shall do what pleases me, achieving the end for which I sent it. And, if you can look at that, remember that scripture when things happen in your life. God uses people, places, events, things that you are going to be go through in your life to guide you, to point you in the direction he wants you to go. And a lot of times we just take the blue pill and say, no, I'm not going to do that. But in the end, he's going to get you there. So, any questions on the first commandment? So, when you wake up tomorrow, which one are you going to take? All right, moving on to the second commandment. So, if we do a good job and have our mind properly oriented towards God, then the next two are going to be real easy for us to abide by, to understand. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. And, it makes sense. I mean, if you're going to honor God and love God with all your heart, then we don't want to be tearing him down with our mouth. But some of the things that the church teaches about the second commandment is to give respect to the Lord's name, is only use it to not introduce in speech except to bless, so no cussing, and to praise and glorify his name, say when we're at church or we're like classes like this. And it also deals with promises and how we deal and interact. Say we're going to got to go to court, on jury duty. So, or if you promise you're going to do something, then these are things that relate to the second commandment. Because if you're promising something and don't follow through with it, well then, that's kind of breaking the second commandment. You're saying, God, I didn't mean that. Blasphemy, uttering against God. And Jesus talks a little bit about that in Matthew. If I can find it real quick. Again, you have heard that it was said to your ancestors, do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow. But I say to you, do not swear at all, not by heaven, for it is God's throne, not by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make a single hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. So, I guess that goes back to kind of your conviction to your heart, too, is why are you saying you're going to do something and you're not? So these all kind of flow together out of the first commandment and orienting your heart and your mind to God. And we talked about oaths, false oaths. A false oath calls on God to be a witness to a lie, and he won't do that. And perjury, just lying under oath. So these are just things that relate to the second commandment that are sins against it, but they're fairly straightforward and they make a lot of sense if we're trying to be in right relationship with God. And the third commandment, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. There are some canon law in the catechism, as far as obligation and what our duties are for the Sabbath. But the old Jewish Sabbath was on a Saturday, and that's when they had it started at sundown. Friday at sundown. And since Jesus' resurrection, the Sabbath has moved then since to from the old Jewish Sabbath on Saturday to Sunday. And because Sunday was the day that Christ was resurrected. It was also the first day of creation. So, because God rested on the seventh day, which was a Sabbath, which is a Saturday. So, yeah, man. And so, we do have a Sunday obligation for coming to Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation. But I don't like to use the word obligation. It kind of means, has a negative connotation to it. I look at it as more, it's an opportunity for us to come and to worship God, because that is what when we come to Mass, it's not, we're doing it for ourselves. We're not doing it for our own benefit, even though when I come and I get something out of it. But we're coming here as an obligation to God to worship Him. So if you look at it from that standpoint, it's not you having to do it. It's, you need to do this to worship God because of all the gifts that He's given you in your life. Well, then it takes on a different meaning. To me, it does anyway. It takes on a different meaning if you look at it that way. So, which, if you come on Sunday, then you get to consume the Eucharist, which is our source of our strength for our Catholic faith. That's where we draw this power. This connection with God is going to keep us, it's going to help us keep our mind and our heart in the right place by continually coming to Mass. And you have the opportunity, you can come every day if you want. I used to do that for a couple of years. I'd go to daily Mass, which at that point in time in my life, I needed it. So it's how you view why you're going to Mass. Now, also, the church does not really want you to work for remuneration. Say, if you are self-employed like I am, you don't go out and work all day Sunday because you need the money. Now, if you need that to keep from getting kicked out of your house, okay, that's fine. But normally, most people have jobs where they don't work on weekends. Although I had a job where I had to work every other weekend. So there is some dispensation, there's some understanding there. You have to live to provide for your family. But it's a day of rest. And it's a day for you to connect with family. And it's a day to, you need that time spiritually to not be working and to recharge your life spiritually and physically. So the church encourages us not to work on Sundays. Don't pick up and go to work because you're overloaded if you can't. So, and then we look at our modern world. I mean, everybody's open on Sundays. Car dealers are open. Everyone's open. Everyone does their shopping and everything on Sundays. So it's kind of taken. There's so many more distractions that's available for us to do rather than go to church, and that's part of the problem with society these days is that they're not going to church because they want to do these other things. So it's a matter of trying to organize your life and your weekends around Sunday, and that may take some time for you to do, working out with your spouse and your kids to try to do that. Maybe your job, you need to kind of work around that, but I've tried to do that in my life. I may work around the house a little bit, but I don't go do jobs on Sundays. And most of the time I try not even to do that. I try to relax, spend time with my wife, because we are busy the other 6 days a week. So, and it gives you that time to connect, because we are social creatures. Humans are social. We need that interaction, especially with our spouses and our family. And we look at it now. Good grief, Black Friday is now Black Thursday at 2 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day. It's like, give me a break. So, there's consumerism in society here, but it's like, I think, some of these things go a little too far. Now, there are some companies that are out there that are good examples for us. Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A are one of them. They just said corporately, no, we're not open on Sundays. Because they believe that their employees need that time on a Sunday with their family. And I think we're probably going to see some more companies doing that. I hope so. And I think we have a part in that. If we don't frequent these places of business on Sundays, they're soon going to realize that, now there's probably plenty of people out there that will. But like I said, again, if we're called to live our Catholic Christian faith the way we are, your life and your actions and how you live your life is probably not going to look like people you work with. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That's good. You're called to be an example in the world, and we're all called to evangelize. Sometimes that happens just by being at work and being who you are and not even saying a word. People can notice your actions and there's something different about you. It gives you an opportunity to talk to people about that. But that's our purpose, is we are called to do that. It wasn't the great suggestion. It was a great commandment, and go make disciples of all nations. So, that is our job. So, any questions on any of the first three?